Hello. I'd like to do a reading of an article entitled, "What is Intuition and How Does It Work?" It's question number 16 of 77 questions from different persons put to Billy from Michael Horn in May 2013. Intuition is, in contrast to the reflection, i.e. the consciousness-based consideration, i.e. examination, the ability to insightfully comprehend an entire thing with its limbs in an unconscious, subconscious wise in one act, as for example, the nature of an object, a situation, a happening, or of any facts, as also the structure of a connection, as well as the imagination, to see through and to overlook something. Intuition is a Latin term, intuere, and it means insight or inner view. This inner view is to be understood in the sense of an immediate holistic sensory perception. This in contrast to a wandering, observing, or abstracting, i.e. universalized, i.e. generalized, observing and considering. Intuitive means, therefore, to make something perceptible through an immediate unconscious, subconscious insight, perception, and processing, to recognize the whole thing as a real factor and to allow it to become conscious as an insight with regard to that which is real, as an intuition, as a conscious factor in the material consciousness. Therefore, internally created intuitions do not consist of ideas that can be carried out, but rather they are based on lightning fast cognitions, factors of cognition, such as from behaviors to be performed at the speed of lightning when there is a danger, or from which cognitions which require very fast deeds and actions, and so on and so forth. Fundamentally, however, an intuition is not to be equated with the instinct, because this is something totally different and is based on an innate natural drive, and as a rule is based in the interest of the preservation of the species and self-preservation. Intuition is a term of ambiguousness because it is reflected in the historical meaning of the word, such as unconscious seeing and perception of facts, immediate cognition of the understanding of a state or situation, etc., intuitive thinking and processing of the unconscious with the subconscious, recognition of the difference between good and evil in the thoughts and feelings, etc. Viewed and considered from a scientific perspective, it is claimed that intuitive thought flashes and their feelings, as well as imaginations, cannot be rationally explained purely scientifically, because supposedly these are just there without being able to fathom its creation, i.e., its origin itself. However, that is typical of scientific wisdom, which is based on an uncognition of the facts, because the whole thing can be certainly explained, but for that, certain cognizances are necessary, which science simply lacks. Absolute unknowledge prevails in the sciences of psychology, psychoanalysis, and psychiatry. For example, with regard to the fact that the human being not only has a subconscious, i.e. subconsciousness, but also has an unconscious, i.e. unconsciousness, which directly precedes the conscious and material consciousness. This unconscious can be comparatively understood as a secretary coming before the consciousness, which autonomously takes in and sorts incoming impulses and perceptions, i.e. facts, after which it provides the pre-processing in a corresponding form before the whole is passed on to the conscious of itself material consciousness. This unconscious, which is not identical with the subconsciousness, has the ability to perceive everything lightning fast, which arises in and around a human being, that the conscious material consciousness is not capable of, and namely because it has a slower perceptual speed than the preceding unconscious. So therefore, it is only possible to the secretary, i.e., the unconscious, as a result of its tremendously fast perception capability, to perceive all those things and to process them lightning fast, which is denied to the conscious material consciousness due to its lower speed of perception. Therefore, the unconscious is able to take in impulses and perceptions with much greater speed and to form thoughts and feelings therefrom, and to bring everything into effect, i.e., to manifestation, than that which is possible for the effective, real, and self-conscious consciousness. So, for example, it comes that if a dangerous situation, a happening, a situation or something else occurs, the unconscious reacts much faster and processes everything mentally in a flash, and indeed is unascertainable for the real consciousness, as this is not possible at this speed for the self-conscious consciousness. For this reason, very often it happens that feelings arise in some situation which are created by the rapid succession of thoughts of the unconsciousness, without these first being created by conscious thoughts, as this is usually the case. With this, it is meant that under normal circumstances, feelings are never created first and then thoughts arise from these, as is erroneously assumed and claimed, but rather that only firstly through conscious thoughts, feelings are also created. Now, if feelings seemingly appear first and only thereafter conscious thoughts, then this leads back to the fact that the unconscious, i.e., unconsciousness that precedes the real consciousness, has performed thought processes in lightning fast sequence through which then real feelings are triggered, which in turn are consciously perceived by the real consciousness. There are no unconscious feelings, but only those which are also perceived consciously. And in this process, which happens in a flash, the conscious, i.e., real consciousness, does not perceive the thought processes of the unconscious preceding it, which then, in uncognizance of the facts, leads to the assumption that feelings would appear first and only thereafter would thoughts come forth. Viewed and considered in the consciousness-based sense, an action gain, in German it's Handlungsgewinnung, comes forth from the intuition, which leads back to many factors of the unconscious world of thoughts. With the process of the intuition, an immediate and very fast reaction originates with regard to a case, deed, action, situation, or to a happening or a problem, and so forth, as well as respect to a thought, feeling-based, or psyche-based, or physical process. This, for example, also if due to some circumstance, the human being falls into a deep dread or anxiety, and through the reaction, his/her unconscious, i.e. unconsciousness, the corresponding feelings are built, which then penetrate into the consciousness, through which he/she then, so to speak, is therein fully absorbed in his/her thoughts and feelings. In this case, he/she is then virtually his/her anxiety and actions, or his/her dread, as well as his/her thoughts and feelings, himself, herself. It often also intuitively comes about that suddenly the right knowledge penetrates into the consciousness, as well as how to rightly act in a case, situation, or during some happening, through an intuition Can something, a thing, an issue, a situation, a happening, an assessment, a thought, feeling, impulsation, or a mode of behavior, and so forth, be rightly appraised in a flash? In this case, intuition is usually understood as a flash thought, which is based on processes of the unconscious, i.e., unconsciousness, which comes before the real consciousness and comes about without conscious reflection, i.e., without previous consideration. And this factor is called unconscious or unconsciousness because its existence is not influenceable by the self-conscious consciousness, simply because its activity is also not perceived. What is intuition and how does it work? With regard to the coming about and the origin of intuition, the whole thing can be explained very well in accordance with the spiritual teaching and in a simple and understandable way. And intuition, in the form that flash thoughts with flash cognitions and so forth appear, has a particular developmental process which the human being, i.e., his/her self-conscious real consciousness, however, does not become aware of. The whole of the occurrence of an intuition is based therein that the unconsciousness, which comes before the human conscious consciousness, which must not be equated with the subconsciousness, works autonomously. This means that when, through the unconscious, instantaneous perceptions are made, that then this, the unconscious and imperceptible for the human being, connects communicatingly with the deeper leveled subconsciousness and works together with it. Through this cooperation of the unconscious with the deeper subconsciousness, everything is processed and clarified in extremely quick succession. And indeed, because everything must happen immensely fast, which cannot be consciously perceived nor clarified by the consciousness, such as, for example, in the case with a sudden problem, a scare, or otherwise with a suddenly appearing happening or situation. Thus, the unconscious or unconsciousness, which comes before the actual consciousness, works autonomously together with the subconsciousness and in an unconscious and imperceptible wise for the human being. Thereby, the unconscious creates solutions with the stored knowledge impulses of the subconsciousness and brings results which are perceived as intuitive first thoughts as well as flash thoughts, imaginations, or feelings, i.e., as intuition of various form, which, however, do not occur through consciously controlled thought processes, but rather only intuitively. Deeds and actions that proceed therefrom are referred to by the human being also as instinct-based. To that point, it is taught in the spiritual teaching that the human being then flows into himself, herself, and this especially because in this state, his/her unconsciousness is very active and works in great speed and stands in constant connection with the subconsciousness, as a result of which the intuitive is built up and comes about. In doing so, from the subconsciousness also flow values stored from time immemorial from out of the subconsciousness itself, as well as from its memory banks into the unconscious, which then processes everything in a flash and transports it through feelings and intuition into the conscious, real consciousness. The result is then simply the intuition, which, if it is created through the cooperation of the unconscious and the subconsciousness, penetrates in a fully conscious wise as flash thoughts, i.e., intuition, into the consciousness. Intuitive capabilities can be furthered through constant training, and namely by furthering the conscious, real consciousness through all sorts of mental quickness exercises in such a wise that the thought speed is furthered. Fact is that the faster the human being can organize, care for, and carry out his/her conscious thoughts and feelings, the more capable he/she is to think faster and faster, to control everything and also to organize it in a logical sequence and to handle it. The whole thing enhances the capability of the consciousness in this respect, that it becomes faster and faster in the perception and processing capability, which in turn leads to the effect that also the preceding secretary, i.e. unconscious, i.e. unconsciousness, becomes faster concerning the perception and processing, because in this respect, it always has to be superior in speed to the real consciousness. Such exercises of quick thinking, quick assessing, and quick acting are an effective training through which also the intuitive capabilities as well as the activity of the brain are furthered, and also an alert consciousness activity takes place. This is a form of development, which means that by this, so to speak, also a state of a higher consciousness can be won. If a high niveau is reached, then therethrough also the intuition can be directed to a certain extent, and indeed in the wise that the acquired life knowledge is thought feeling based, spoken to and perceived and registered by the unconscious in order to couple it together with the subconsciousness and to use it. If this happens, namely that the unconscious gets in connection with the subconscious, i.e. the subconsciousness, then as a result, logical aspects are formed from its entire knowledge and from impulses out of the storage banks, after which the whole is expressed then as an intuition. Of course, it's blazing nonsense if, for example, it is claimed by the esoterics that through the whole thing it can be seamlessly passed over into a so-called channeling, i.e. the consciously brought about contacts with spiritual beings, spirits, or with extraterrestrials, because neither a channeling in any kind and wise is possible, nor contacts with so-called spiritual, i.e. spirit beings. Such drivel corresponds to an imagination, i.e. a delusion from which simply human beings of delusional, esoteric, occult, religious, and sectarian form are befallen, because in this regard, they are not able or capable of rational thoughts and feelings due to a delusion belief, or have lost this ability through suggestive sectarian insinuations, through laziness or neglect. In colloquial speech and in literature, various synonyms are used for intuition, such as first thought, flash thought, gut feeling, instinct, serendipity, sixth sense, inspiration, a good nose, and a brainwave, etc. Although several of these names are completely wrong, such as inspiration, sixth sense, and a good nose, and serendipity, which fundamentally are to be expressed as other values. And that's it. Thank you.